And while we're figuring out why our guest's picture keeps going in and out and he's bouncing it around, welcome everybody. This is Polygon Issuance number 73. While an earthquake takes place at our guest's location in Peoria, Illinois. But this here, myself, Jeff Wilcox, hosting the show by myself mainly because most of our other co-hosts are at high school football games. And we have this problem in the fall, so it's nothing new. But I can handle it. It's not horrible. Of course, I've been handling it most of the summer too, but we'll deal with that. But before we get into our guest situation, he took his glasses off. He's being smart today. So
yeah, those are just my cheaters.
And there's some more cheating going on with him later, so we're going to get into that later. But when we'll discuss the current weather for the time being, since both our guests, who I'll just say right off the bat is Chuck Collins, who's the chief meteorologist. I believe he's the chief meteorologist.
Yes.
Yes, he's the chief meteorologist at like 60,000 stations that they have there. There's like now. And I can get into that, and we'll get into that a little later on. But since he and I are roughly about a 2.5 hour drive apart, our weather's pretty much about the same. It's a lot cooler. It's a lot drier, and it's going to feel like fall now, even though we're still not into what is fall. We're in meteorological fall, but it's nice change from the 80s and 90s, which unfortunately are coming back next week. Typical September in the Midwest. It could be 40 or 39 one morning. 3 days later, it's 90 again. Yeah, that's typical September weather.
Exactly.
Outside of that, not much else is going on in the country. Showers, storms. The tropics, well, Henri died. It dissipated. Well, it's a remnant moving out into the Atlantic. Nothing really happening in the Pacific, although I didn't look, so there probably is. A lot of the remnants of Linda are moving into the southwest, so there's going to be a lot of precipitation with that. Might have a feeling some of that may come our way later in the week, but it's been somewhat dry lately around here. I'll get into this rant before I get in with Chuck. We had a flash flood watch issued here a couple days ago, and all the TV people were going, "Oh my gosh, it's going to rain 3 inches of rain here." I got 1/4 inch. Parts of the state got 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 inches. I didn't. And it's the same parts of the state of Iowa. Central Iowa has been getting just doused with rain, and it's flooding everywhere. Here we can't buy a drop of rain, and that's been the case all of August, and now the first several weeks, a week or week and a half of September. We've had some decent rains, but nothing like Central Iowa's had. So. Oh, well, we've had a few active days. I know our guest, Chuck, had a tornado, a fairly weak tornado, if they even found anything, well south of Peoria. Somewhere, now I have to think of the counties, either Menard County, Mason County, somewhere in that area.
Mason, yes.
Yeah, it was in Mason County. And when we get into this, because when I've been through Central Illinois, I don't know what it is, because I didn't mention this during our test that we had yesterday. I've been to Peoria twice. I have stayed in hotels in Peoria. One time it was in Peoria, and one time it was in Morton.
Okay.
And it was both times we were to go to Iowa, Illinois football games in Champaign. One time, and so you'd know automatically, cold weather. Actually, I've been in Illinois, more central Illinois, gone through Peoria several times. The one time it was horribly cold, and in our hotel the heater hadn't been turned on, and it smelled so bad the smoke alarms went off.
Come on.
That was funny. Second time, this was the one in Morton. I had my weather radio with me. I always take my weather radio with me because I have my mobile weather radio, blah blah blah. And I go down, and we're going down. And we're driving past about Galesburg on 74. And there's like thunder and lightning in the distance. And I'm thinking, okay, because I was expecting there'd be storms, but I wasn't expecting severe storms. And lo and behold, they issue a tornado warning, I think south of Peoria. It was moving northeast, and it hit, I believe, Morton. We were there at the time. And I can remember it got so windy, and we were at the Wendy's, which I don't know if the Wendy's is still there in Morton.
Yes.
We were in that, my father and I, and it got so windy, you couldn't see more than 20 or 30 feet out the window. So, but it was like so weird because that was like in October many years ago. And then there was another time in 2002, we were driving through, and that was a weird day, but I'm not going to go into it because you want to talk about stuff and I'm just blabbing on. But it seems like every time I go through Peoria, something bad happens.
Yeah.
Either tornadoes or something. But the one thing is this one time back in 2002 when I was driving through, we left here up in Iowa. Snow, this was in April. Snow, sleet, wintry mix. We get down to Peoria. So of course it was in the 30s up here. Got to Peoria, the temperature was 50 in a storm because that was where the cold front was. We dropped to the other side of Morton going toward Bloomington, and all you see is this big black mass straight ahead of us to the east, and there's a bunch of tornado warnings south of us coming at us. And I had the weather radio on, and I don't know if it's still the case. They could not pronounce any city right. I was like, good grief. I don't know if it's the case. There's a town in Illinois. It's in your area, San Jose. I think it's what it's supposed to be said, if it's supposed to be said as the town in California, but there's a town in Illinois called that.
Yeah, it's San Joe's here. It's San Joe's.
Well, that's not what the weather service pronounced it either. The weather radio person pronounced it as San Jose.
Yeah. Was it the automated voice?
Yes.
Because they can't delineate. They mispronounce cities all across the country. They're just not programmed to do the local vernacular that much. But yeah, I know what you mean. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it makes no sense. So I always made fun of weather radio in Central Illinois, and then I noticed that the weather radio in Peoria, for example, the audio is not working. Figures. Yeah,
we got to figure out. There's a phone line. There has been a phone line issue. I'm not sure of the status right now, but a phone line issue and a big hum. And folks were calling me yesterday because see that also inhibited warnings from going off yesterday on weather radios.
Yeah.
So weather radios didn't go off for some severe weather we had yesterday, but sometimes technology is technology, and you got to deal with it when it's not working.
So yeah, I happened to just see that. So we spent like 5-10 minutes talking about me and hardly you talking. So we'll let him talk lots more when we get into the interview, which we'll do right now. So we typically ask our guests how they got interested in weather, but my guess is that's not really when you grew up, because you were born in Cairo, Illinois, and I got it right. It's not Cairo. Cairo. It's that town. It's the southern tip of Illinois, for those that don't know.
Yes.
Cairo, down. But
it's like syrup.
Yeah, Cairo.
Cairo. Yeah, there you go.
They need to fix the town name. They should just call it Confluence City.
Southern Illinois, I mean, they're all named. A lot of cities are named after towns in Egypt because it's called Little Egypt. So you got Cairo, you got Thebes, you got Tams, you got Alexander, which is for Alexandria. So it's all named after Egyptian cities and locales. And the Southern Illinois Salukis, the Saluki is an Egyptian racing dog. Which is a close relationship to the greyhound, but it's an Egyptian racing dog. So that's the reason why you've got all those names down there of Egyptian type names, because they named Southern Illinois after Egypt.
Yeah, so he was born there. So that took 5 minutes of him figuring out where he was born. So were you always somewhat interested in weather, or as you grew up, Was that like kind of like a background thing, or what?
Yeah. I was born in Carroll. We moved to Peoria when I was 3, so I've lived most of my life here in the Peoria area. No, actually, Jeff, I grew up wanting to be on Peoria radio and TV, and I got that chance. I always liked weather, but never really thought of myself as a meteorologist. I thought of myself as somebody on the radio or an anchor or a reporter on TV. So that's what I grew up wanting to be. And I did that. I spent 10 years in radio and didn't even think about TV. And then I went to work in 1986 for WMBD, AM, FM, and TV. It was a combination, not a combination anymore, but it was a 3-station building. And I was on WMBD radio. And the news director came to me, says, I know you're a weather nut. You like breaking weather and breaking news. You want to try out for a weekend weather position. I tried out for it. I got bit by the bug. I went back to school, and then I've been doing weather since '88. But I've been in the business 39 years, 38 of them here in Peoria, and I've been doing weather since 1988.
Now, that seems to be interesting for the fact that it seems like a lot of people who don't really want to get into weather somehow end up getting into weather, because I noticed this last night because I went through a bunch of YouTube videos. And there's several people that would start out in the same position as you. They want to be on television doing like anchoring or whatever, but then somehow they end up being somewhat pushed into weather, and then they love it so much that they just stay there.
Yeah, exactly. And radio, I always say that students nowadays need to spend time in radio before getting into TV. Radio was my best experience. I had no problem with the transition whatsoever, because on radio you're ad-libbing and you have those skills. And I had those skills when I went to weather, so it was a natural fit. And then once I got to doing weather, I said, well, I want to know what I'm doing, so I went back to school to get my credentials. But I wanted to know what I was talking about, and be validated by the audience. But yeah, that turns out for a lot of folks, a lot of guys guys and gals who have been around a while in television actually probably started in radio, and a lot of my generation started in radio first and went to TV. It was a natural transition, so that made it easy for me when I started doing weather.
So when you were in radio, this was back in the late 70s into the early 80s.
Right.
It was pretty much, I would assume, when you came to breaking weather news, if there was like a tornado or something,
right,
would you go on the air and
sure,
stay on the air on the radio more or less to television back in the day, when most cases they didn't?
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, we went wall-to-wall coverage, and I think radio is still the best platform for breaking weather events, staying on the air in a continuous coverage situation. TV, that's a good platform as well. We've obviously had to stay on continuous coverage, but radio is so immediate, and I always like the immediacy of radio. And so yeah, we really did a lot of severe weather because we had the time to. We didn't have the constrictions sometimes that we have in TV. So and I enjoyed breaking news and especially breaking weather. So and one of the bosses there realized that and said, I want you to try some TV weather. And I did, and I got bitten by the bug, and I wanted to do weather all the time. So that's what I've been doing since '88, and I've been a chief since '99.
So during the time in radio, because we'll get into television sooner or later.
Okay.
During the radio time, do you ever remember any certain events that you were on for like constantly hours and hours doing breaking weather that or whatnot?
Yeah, and I don't, simply because we don't have like Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas. We generally don't have long duration tornadoes. So we, a lot of times, didn't have to do continuous coverage. We would if it warranted. In my radio days, one of the biggest weather events was our back-to-back winters of 77, 78, 78, 79, the worst winters in our history, with the most snow and the coldest back-to-back. And I was working at a radio station that was out in the country at the time, and I was stranded out there for 3 days, did have some food, and we did have a shower and bathroom facilities, but I was stranded out there for 3 days because they had to come and dig us out. That's what I remember about my radio day as far as weather. It was a continuation of 2 back-to-back really severe winters where we had double the amount of snow and the coldest winters on record. So that's what I remember about my radio days, being stranded at the station for 3 days before people could come in and get us out.
So when you went into television, this was in the late 80s.
Right.
What was it like in Peoria at the time in the late 80s with regards to, say, like the radar coverage and that type of thing and the graphics? Because Peoria is not like Chicago or Kansas City or St. Louis. It's a medium to small market.
Yeah, and a lot of people are surprised at this. Even in 1988, which I consider not that long ago, we had the magnetic board still. We got a radar feed from our sales, which was about 2 hours old, if we were lucky. And we used the electronic graphics through our graphics system in the control room to put up the forecast. But I started out on a magnetic board. I still have that magnetic board. It's in my basement. And my son, who's now 20, learned to count on that because he would put up the numbers and play weatherman in the basement. But yeah, I actually started out in the tail end era of the magnetic board, and then we started going to dial-up graphics from various vendors before we got our own weather system and a vendor to give us the radar and satellite. But that didn't come until the early 90s. So yeah, I started out on a magnetic board, and that's pretty much where I stayed for about 3 minutes, unless we were lucky enough to have a little bit of radar come in from our sales from a sister station in Champaign, which would feed it to us over the interlink line we had established. So I did start out on the magnetic board before electronic graphics.
That for those that would think that just seems so 70s.
Yeah.
Because I would compare it to my market. Peoria is what? Market size 117?
116.
116. My market's 90. And in the late 80s, 2 of the big 3 stations here had their own radar.
Yeah.
And it was not great radar, but it was okay. And then you had, of course, the Doppler radar, which you had to then call up or whatever, and you'd maybe get it. But I mean, back, it just seems like you in Peoria, you started out and you're already maybe like 5 to 10 years behind. It seems like. So
yeah, it seems like that was the case as far as weather. Peoria's been pretty progressive as far as other technology, but yeah, we did. And I started out in my first weather system. I started out and actually had a paint board and a paint stick I had to create graphics on, but it was slow going in the late 80s, early 90s for medium to smaller markets to get weather equipment, because anybody who knows anything about it, weather equipment's not cheap. Eventually, we got a dial-up system. We could dial up to a company, get some generic graphics sent down. And for a long time, we used graphics from the network feed that came down. Every network has, weather feeds. And at the time, it was CBS. They were feeding down daily still graphics of national surface maps and forecast highs. That was our weather presentation for a while as well, until we got our own system. And nobody in Peoria has their own radar. We all still go through vendors to get our radar. And Peoria will probably be a market that'll never have a live Doppler radar because of the expense involved. And Decatur has one. That's about the closest one downstate that has their own radar. And I doubt Peoria will ever see live radar.
And we talked about this in our group about the radar coverage, especially in parts of Western Illinois. It's not the best. It's okay, but it's not the best. It'd be the western part of your viewing area. It tends to be beams are too high, especially from, let's say, the Quad Cities or St. Louis or Lincoln. Is that troubling when you're trying to say there's like a tornado there, but the rotation is not looking good? It doesn't look great, and the beam is at 8,000 feet.
Right. Yeah, I haven't really had too much problem because we do have access and do use, of course, Lincoln, which is Central Illinois Radar, our local National Weather Service office 40 miles south. We have a lot of overlapping here, though. We'll do Quad Cities, we'll do Lincoln, we'll do St. Louis, we'll do well, Paducah and Evansville are too far south, but so Quad Cities, Lincoln, and St. Louis and Chicago, we overlap pretty well here where we are. So I haven't had much of a problem with that. But I could see where some stations would. But we're pretty much we pretty much overlap each other and get a good idea what's going on, even in the fringe.
Now we'll get to the big outbreak in 2013 later, but we'll talk about, let's say, any memorable type events, let's say in the late 80s and into the 90s. So we'll split it into at least the first 2/3 of your time at Channel 31.
Yeah.
Was there anything memorable during that time?
Back in 1990, and we're talking the Plainfield Joliet Crest Hill tornado in Chicago. We, that day in Peoria, got like 65, 70 mile an hour sustained winds for 2 or 3 minutes time. Did a lot of damage. We were a war zone that day as well. We didn't get the tornadic activity. We got the straight line winds. But that was always a situation that I remember, because although Joliet, Crest Hill, Plainfield got all the real big stuff, the devastating tornadoes there, we received our fair share of damage. Had trees and power lines down all over the place because we had a nasty situation of straight line winds come through, not for just a gust. I mean, these lasted for a few minutes and caused a lot of damage. So that's one thing. And we've had a couple of winters, but I'd say as far as the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, we were pretty quiet. I mean, we had a couple of big El Niños in the 90s when I first, late 80s, when I first started doing weather. So I didn't deal with a lot of severe weather early on, because when I started doing weather, we had a couple of pretty good El Niños going on. We didn't have much going on, period, as far as weather is concerned, except on the backside, some big drought in '88. Which I remember well because I first started doing weather there. So I can't think of too many significant outbreaks. We had the Roanoke tornado of 2004 when I was still at WMBD, and that was Parsons Manufacturing. 140 people in that building took a direct hit from an then F4 tornado, but the owner built very sturdy storm shelters in the restrooms or the bathrooms. All 140 people huddled in the bathrooms, and those were the only things standing at the end of it. Otherwise, 140 people would have been dead in that tornado. But the bathrooms and storm shelters were standing. So that was 2004. So that was quite an afternoon. That was a July tornado, which we don't see a lot of here. But so there were a few things in the 80s and 90s before I came over here in 2009. But that Plainfield tornado day was a significant day because we had a lot of damage around here as well, just with straight line winds.
Now, I would talk about the flood of '93. It didn't really affect Peoria as badly as other areas. Would I be correct in that?
Right, yeah, although that is one of our wettest summers ever on record, but no, we didn't get it because the Mississippi River Basin took the brunt of that. We did have some backup. One of the reasons why we had a little bit of problem south of Peoria is the Mississippi River actually backed up into the Illinois River, because the Illinois River empties into the Mississippi. Well, it actually backed things up a little bit upstream. But we had a lot of rain, but we didn't have the flooding like they did along the Mississippi River Basin. Our biggest rain, or our biggest flooding situation we've had was, 2013, when our river went to near record levels. And then this past June, we had a heck of a time. We had 16 inches of rain between June 6th and July 11th. And that was about 90% of our rain this summer. And it's still causing an issue with harvesting the corn, because we're not harvesting quite yet, because farmers want to still keep an eye on that corn and have it try and keep its root system strong, because it very weak root system after having all that rain. Farmers planted fine this spring, but we had, like I said, almost 16 inches of rain during that 5-week period of time, which really did in the corn. So we've had our fair share of flooding. Being a river town along the Illinois River, we have to watch it closely. But 2013, was the closest we've come to setting the record, because that was quite a spring there. And it came up this past spring, but not quite to that level, because 2013 was a severe situation. So flooding is always a concern around here, especially in the Illinois River Basin. Peoria sits above the river. The river's down below, so it's almost like it's a big saucer, and everything flows right into the river. So we've had some memorable flooding experiences as well.
Now, do you remember any really bad winter storms, or what I would consider really bad ice storms, let's say, during the entire period the last 20 or so years?
Yeah, we've had a few. We had, I think our worst ice storm was, I want to say 89. That was our most severe. We've had a couple since then. We usually don't end up with an out-and-out ice storm situation, but once in a great while. So we had one in 89. There have been a couple of smaller ones since then, but here, like anywhere else in the Midwest, anything can happen. But we're pretty much in a snow belt, although forecasting mid-latitude cyclones in the wintertime in the Midwest is a challenge, smaller ones. As far as freezing rain, not too many events like that. We've had our fair share of big snows. We had the Groundhog Day blizzard 5 years ago.
Yes.
15.5 inches of snow. Didn't quite get the 24-hour record in Peoria, or the daily calendar record, but it was enough. But then 2 weeks later, it was 64 degrees. So that winter wasn't that bad, because things would melt, as opposed to the late 70s winters when nothing melted and it all stayed on the ground. So we've had memorable snows. Now, 2 years ago, we had our snowiest winter on record. But once again, it snowed every few days, but we had some thawing in between. We didn't have the snow stay on the ground all winter like the late 70s. So we get our fair share, but Peoria's kind of in between things. Here in central Illinois, we're kind of in between southern Illinois, which is a little bit milder and has a more of a wintry mix type situation and rain. Then we have northern Illinois, north of I-80, which is, a colder and snowier scenario. We're kind of in between, so sometimes we get it all. But as far as freezing rain events, ice storm events, we've had a couple, but I think one of the worst ones I remember was back in '89, so they just don't come about too often.
Yeah, I probably just put the kiss of death on that. You'll have one this year.
Yeah. Well, with everybody talking, the Weather Service and all the folks at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena studying El Nino. I mean, if El Nino is panning out to where most people think it is and getting stronger and stronger this winter and spring, we might have a mild winter. But I caution people, and you're right, just because we have a mild winter and maybe below normal snow doesn't mean we won't have precip. We could have a mixture of precip. We could have freezing rain. It could be, it might not be that cold, but it may be cold enough for freezing rain. So, I hope you haven't jinxed us there, but I'm hoping for a mild winter. We need one after the past couple around here.
Now, that I had remembered a question, then I forgot it, and then you just reminded me again. When people hear, oh, it's going to be a mild winter, oh, that everybody's going to be so happy. It's almost similar to the one hurricane type thing. If one hurricane hits something, it's a bad season. For example, It could be a mild winter, but you could have 20 below zero only once, and people will remember that. Or you could have a 16-inch snowstorm, and you may not get any more snow, or maybe like little clipper systems, but everybody's going to remember it as being a horrible winter, except for 75% it's going to be mild.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I caution people, because mild winters don't necessarily mean pretty winters. That means clouds. There's a lot of fog usually. There's a wintry mix of rainy, and you could have an occasional big snow and a big polar air outbreak. And as you said, people will remember those and maybe nothing else. And it's going to be interesting. I'm withholding my winter forecast for about another 3 weeks. I want to look at a few more things. We have had strong winter El Ninos where we haven't had mild winters. But stats usually tell us, or climatological data tells us, that when we have this El Nino, the strong one setting up, usually we have a mild winter. That's not always the case. And the Farmer's Almanac is thinking the opposite. So we got a battle going on there right now. But I'm going to wait about 3 weeks and before I come out with my thoughts on winter. But I think it looks like it's going to trend milder. And we hope so, because that means the main storm track will stay to the south of us. And at least California and the Southwest and the drought areas will pick up some moisture this winter. Let's hope so. Won't break the drought out there, but at least it'll put a dent in it. So I'm hoping for those folks we have El Nino. And for us, personally, I could use a milder winter after the last couple. I don't mind a milder winter now and then.
Now, everybody's been talking about this El Nino, or Godzilla El Nino as it's been talked about. Yeah. That a lot of people have been comparing it to the 97-98 El Nino.
Right.
Now, a lot
82-83, yeah.
And 82-83. Now, I remember the 97-98 El Nino for one reason, and it's a snowstorm, unfortunately. The snowstorm was in October of 97. And it was mild. We had a mild fall. And I noticed this because they talked about it up here about, oh, the winter's going to be mild, blah, 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 blah. But they say one thing, the fall could be completely crazy because you never know what you're going to get. You could get a snowstorm out of season in October, which you're not prepared for. And I'll tell you, they were not prepared for it. And then the rest of the winter is going to be like mild, nothing happens, a couple of snowstorms, maybe a little cool snap. But everybody, including me, remembers that snowstorm in October of 97 because all the leaves were still on the trees because it had been in the 80s weeks before. And then you get heavy wet snow on trees that still have almost all their leaves on it. You get 6 to 12 inches of snow like we had, and all the trees come down, power's out for days, and people remember that. And that was a fall system. It wasn't technically in the winter, but people remember that. And I remember that, and I'm thinking, are we going to have something similar to this, and it's not in wintertime? Because it can snow in October here. It could even snow down there around Halloween. Yeah, we've our earliest snow was late September back in 1942. We've had snow in September. It doesn't happen once in a blue moon, but it does. But you're right about that. And fall is the big question mark because El Nino is still growing. It's not strong and won't be strong until maybe late fall into the winter and maybe into the spring. But I think our fall, at least here in central Illinois, there's no clear-cut indication of a dry fall or a wet fall or a warm fall or a cool fall. So that tells me we're going to have some extremes going on. They may average out to normal, but we might have some active weather either way this fall because we're right in between, the below normal precip in the Great Lakes and the above normal precip in the Southern Plains, kind of in between. And although that could be a benign pattern, sometimes we get some pretty good extremes going. So, I'm looking at fall interesting because, as you mentioned off the top, we're going to be in the upper 60s for highs tomorrow, some upper 40s, but then I'm looking at upper 80s by Wednesday here. So we're going to have a little bit of volatility, I think, this fall before hopefully the pattern settles down a little bit in the winter. Now, when we talk about temperatures going up and down in a roller coaster, which is seeming like this is going to be what it's been all of September. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. We have to talk about stuff that seems like when you talk about extremes, we have to talk about severe weather. And it seems like lately there's been a lot of severe weather in the fall, which is somewhat out of season for the Midwest especially. But lately it seems like it hasn't been. There's been a lot of outbreaks in the fall. And we could discuss the 2013 outbreak, which we'll go into, but I can automatically start thinking of, and it's not just in your area, it's in but the Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, up in the Ohio Valley, Veterans Day 2002, November 2005. So November 2005 was just littered with tornadoes everywhere. Iowa, the Evansville tornado was that year. Right. And then Harrisburg, Illinois. Yeah, there was. And we have the November 2013 outbreak, which we'll get into. And we had the October outbreak in Northwest Iowa 2 years ago. It's becoming a little more apparent that it seems like lately. And I discussed this on a show a couple of weeks ago. I think it was with Steve Hilberg, who was the former director of the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. I discussed this with him. And because he's been on the show. And I thought, are we starting to get into a fall period where we have active weather again? And does El Nino maybe kind of make it a little more active when we have these temperatures going up and down, 90, then it's 60, you have storms? Because you had a tornado, even though it was a weak one yesterday, it was only one,
Right.
but it's in September, and nobody really expects to see tornadoes in September, October, November.
Right, and ironically, we've had some of our bigger tornadoes in the off season. As I mentioned, Roanoke, July of '04. But coming up on Monday, the 14th, is the 50th anniversary of the last tornado that hit the city of Peoria that caused any damage. That was 50 years ago, and it was an F3. 30 people were injured. Didn't have any fatalities, thank goodness, but that was 50 years ago coming up. That was the last tornado to cause any damage in the city of Peoria. We had a couple, we had one back in 2010, caused a little bit of damage on the west side, but that was the last major tornado to go through Peoria, and that was almost a fall tornado. And of course, back in 2013, the big tornado outbreak that day on November 17th. So, yeah, we've had our fair share of them, but I'm not sure if fall, we've always considered fall as the second severe weather season. So severe weather in the fall isn't very surprising to me because you have the reverse. You have the cold air trying to come in and have the warm air retreating. It's vice versa in the spring where you have the initial clashes. Well, you have clashes going on in the fall. So I'm not sure if we're having a bigger increase in fall tornadoes or severe weather, because after all, it is kind of the second severe weather season. I've considered it that. So we've had our fair share of fall tornadoes. A couple of years ago, that was an extreme situation in late late fall, but we've had our fair share of them as well here.
And I only was mentioning that because it just seems fairly odd. But then I could go back and look. For example, in Iowa, we've had several EF5, F5 tornadoes. One occurred in October.
Yeah.
And I mean, which is the only, and if I had to go, I might have to go back. I think it's the only F5 tornado in the entire country in October. And it was in Iowa, which is kind of an oddity. And we've had several outbreaks in September, October, November.
Sure.
In Iowa, it just seems like, I think it's similar to, well, a couple years ago, there was only 900 tornadoes a year. Well, there probably was a lot more because nobody saw them. And so everybody's thinking there's just an increase. It might be for the fact that everybody sees them now because there's storm chasers and everybody has a video camera and everything, and they have their iPhone or a tablet showing pictures, and it's like, so, and that would lead me to the tornado we had here, not that far from me, about 2 weeks ago. Nobody would have seen it except for two of our chasers, where they were only 5 miles from their house, happened to see the wall cloud and see it touch down. It was on the ground in just one farm field, and they caught it. So and that would have been one that probably would have never been seen.
And one of the aggravating factors about severe weather in the fall and even the winter is here, and I'm pretty sure, and in the Midwest, I think it's the same. It's not like a spring or summer tornado when you've got mild weather to clean up. You usually have a sharp cold front or a sharp temperature gradient, and you get cold, and that makes it much more difficult for the cleanup. And that's what we faced 2 years ago in Washington. And we've had that. I remember one tornado back, I think in '67, hit here locally, hit one of the small airports, and the next day we had 10 inches of snow because that system has a sharp gradient. So that's one bad thing about fall and winter tornadoes. The cleanup is unbearable because it usually turns real cold afterwards.
That was January '67.
Yeah,
that's another outbreak. That's even more extreme when you talk about.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
You're talking about that was January 24th. There was tornadoes in St. Louis, outside Kansas City, Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And I'm going to go on this for a bit. That storm system moved to the east a little bit. Then another system came up because the front stalled, and another low pressure center came up from the southwest. And that caused what most people in Chicago remember as the Chicago blizzard. of 60
Right.
dumped 2 feet of snow.
Oh yeah.
And everybody remembers that, but then everybody forgot about the tornadoes. So you have all this tornado damage, and now you have a blizzard right after it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem in a lot of cases with these fall tornadoes, that it's not going to be like in the spring where it's 70 degrees the next day after it had been 85. It's going to be like 65 or 70 because the dew points won't be as high.
Yeah.
It's more of a dynamic
And
situation more than thermodynamics because the capes are not 5,000 joules. You're not going to have temperatures in the 80s and dew points in the 70s. You're going to have probably, if you had something similar to, let's say, November 2013, November 17th, if I remember right, the temperatures were, and you might have to correct me, temperatures I think were in the low to mid 70s, if that, and the dew points were around 60, which in November, that's, oh my gosh, there's going to be bad weather. You have that in May, that's not even going to produce anything unless there's a lot of dynamics around.
Yeah, we were 30 degrees the next day and 10 degrees 5 days later with snow.
Yeah.
With that Washington tornado.
Yeah, so we'll get into this now. Talk about how the November 17th, 2013, how it's set up, and were you seeing it on models prior to this, thinking that something bad was going to happen?
Yeah, fortunately, from a forecasting standpoint, this was almost too easy because we were talking about this thing 4 days out. We saw stuff 4 days out, and as it got closer and closer, we kept saying, "Uh-oh, this doesn't look good." We were placed in a moderate risk. The tornado occurred Sunday morning. We were put at a moderate risk, I think Friday night, early Saturday morning. By the time midnight rolled around Saturday, we were in a high risk, and we knew what was going to happen, and we were looking for a significant possibility of a tornado outbreak, of long tracking tornadoes between a few hours time. About we nailed it down to about 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., and that's exactly when the parameters came. The only problem, the tornado outbreak of the 17th started here. We couldn't look out west and track cells coming our way. It started here, and we had an EF2 tornado. The first one, we had 2 around here. One was in Pekin, nearby Pekin, which is not far from Washington and East Peoria where we are. It's still in Tazewell County. The first one hit across the river in Peoria County and came right across the river into the north side of Pekin. By the time that thing blew up, Pekin residents had 5 minutes warning. Weather Service could only get out 5 minutes warning. But East Peoria had 10 minutes. Washington had 15. So we did have some leeway. But the problem that morning, it was well forecast, and we were ready for it. The problem, we didn't know where these things would start hitting because they weren't hitting out west yet and tracking our way. They just blew up on top of us. And so Pekin only had about 5 minutes, but that was an EF2. There was just some minor injuries, thank goodness. Then the second tornado, which was the Washington tornado that blossomed into an EF4 monster, actually started here at our station, right outside the entrance to our station here in East Peoria, touched down as an EF2, and then blossomed into the EF4 monster that stayed on the ground for 47 minutes, 47 miles, moving 60 miles an hour, crossing 3 interstates. And it all started here right outside our station when we were on the air. And of course, a lot of people have seen it on YouTube, and you have too. Myself and the weekday meteorologist at the time, Sandy Gallant, she's no longer at the station. She went to law school, is going to law school. We both took cover because we heard it, because it's an unmistakable sound. I've heard 2 tornadoes in my life that have touched down about a few hundred feet away from me, and it's the most unmistakable sound in nature. We knew that sound. We yelled for everybody to go to our storm shelter here, and then we emerged a couple of minutes later and continued our coverage because we didn't know where that tornado was going. Unfortunately, that's the one that ended up in Washington and just devastated that community, and still stayed on the ground for another 20, 30 minutes after that.
Now, we'll get into the discussion of why, on that YouTube clip, of why you had to go off the air. And we discussed this on our test, and we'll discuss a little bit later. But were you slightly surprised that the storms just blew up and were automatically tornadic almost immediately?
Yeah, not really, because I had been talking with the Weather Service in Lincoln, which is 40 miles south of here. and we had been, discussing this, media briefings, et cetera, et cetera. We knew that that morning was going to be a difficult morning because of just the way the dynamics were. I woke up that Sunday morning. I woke up 6 o'clock. It was 70 degrees. As you mentioned, our dew point was way up there, over 60. I looked up. I saw just fast-moving jet stream, just cumulus clouds just billowing by. That jet was moving well over 100 knots. And you didn't have to be a meteorologist that morning to realize this isn't good. This isn't right. And that was at 7 o'clock. I had my morning coffee, looked at all the soundings, and looked at everything else I could look at. And by that time, we were looking at a high risk for about a 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. period. So we gathered the troops. We're at the station by 9. And I think the Pekin tornado touched down at 9:55. Just blew right up.
Now, when we talk about tornadoes, typically tornadoes, they're in the afternoon, typically afternoon and evening. But these were in the morning, and it was a Sunday. So when you think about Sunday morning, there's a lot of people at church and in churches everywhere. So were you concerned about that a lot of people weren't at their televisions watching, or unless they had smartphones at church, which I don't think sounds very good. That sounds fairly rude. But were you concerned that there was a lot of people that were kind of not, what I would say, connected with what was possibly going to happen?
That's a good question, and it's a two-edged sword because, well, we had 3 people died in that Washington tornado. 1 that day, 2 died of their injuries later on. But actually, the saving grace, if you will, were that a lot of people weren't home. They were in church. A lot of people were in church. They weren't at home. And none of the churches were affected. There were a couple of churches nearby, but none of the churches were hit. Just a large residential and a little bit of commercial, but a large residential area. So we found out almost the opposite. A lot of people weren't home. They may have been disconnected a little bit, but at least they weren't home. Otherwise, if people were home, it would have been a whole different story. Plus, if we're talking 4 hours earlier, at 6 o'clock in the morning, that would have been devastating. People would have been at home in bed, and that would have been a devastating situation. So timing played it out very well to keep the loss of life and the injury down. It didn't, affect the damage any because it was a significant hit. But I think the feeling is that because it hit so late in the morning and people were at church and it was Sunday, that actually helped things out. But most of the churches have weather radios, and the Washington mayor was in church, and that's how he found out about it, because the weather radios in the church office started going off, and they knew something was going on. And by that time, you could almost hear and see it because it was such a massive situation. So I think actually the timing helped, even though people may not have been at home and disconnected, and they were a lot of people were watching us on TV, and a lot of people took cover because I took cover, because my philosophy is I practice what I preach, and if I'm in harm's way here, I'm ducking to cover, and I want people to do the same thing. And a lot of people have told us that when you took cover, we didn't want to know what was going on. We took cover if you took cover. So that was one good thing about us taking cover. I think a lot of people followed that lead, when sometimes people may wait for the sirens, or maybe think they'll kind of wait it out and see what happens. So when they saw us take action, people knew it was serious. And when we emerged, we knew it was serious as well once we saw what was going on upstream. That debris ball was 20,000 feet in the air, and we knew it wasn't going to be good when we started seeing that.
At the time, did the Lincoln office have dual pole capability at the time?
Yeah. And that was the first time the Lincoln office had issued, because, over the past few years, as you well know, the Weather Service has changed since Joplin. Its warning wording, it's now saying death can occur. It uses the word death, deadly. Very strong terms. That was the first time I think the Lincoln office had done that because of Joplin, of what happened to Joplin. And they really were on this thing, and really were telling people that, yeah, this is a deadly situation. You could have loss of life, or will have loss of life in this particular storm. And they were on top of it. But that's the first time they used that vernacular. But that was the outshoot of Joplin, because A lot of people didn't heed the warnings when they knew it was coming in Joplin. So that's when they really started getting tough, real tough wording and almost doomsday type wording. And we saw that morning, and we knew when we saw that type of wording how serious it was, and of course the reports we were getting upstream, because Washington on straight line from us is maybe 5-6 miles. I mean, we were that close to it, but it started here. So, but the Weather Service that day really got out the warning as fast as possible, and we got out the word. All the other media did, and we saved some lives that day, because that was something we're not used to around here. We don't have those long tracking tornadoes that stay on the ground for 45 minutes. We just don't have those. We have the little EF zeros, 1s, 2s, an occasional 3. Pop down, pop up, and may have a few of those like we did last night. But we're not used to that, and that is extremely rare for us to have that. But everybody was on top of it, because it was well forecasted 3 or 4 days in advance. We knew that was going to be a problem. Ironically, in Illinois, that Sunday was the start of Winter Weather Preparedness Week. Talk about, ironically, an ironic situation. We're gearing up for winter weather, and we're dealing with this massive tornado. So, yeah, it was a very unique situation on all aspects. Anybody having to do with it, it was just something we just don't see, especially here, but especially that time of the year. Strongest tornado in Illinois in November. It occurs here. I mean, so, but it was very well forecast, and the warning got out, and it was a joint effort by everybody involved, and that's when unfortunately 3 people died, but it could have been a lot worse if it was timed out any differently.
Now, when we discussed the time of the day, since it was like most of these tornadoes in your area were before noon, and that's another atypical thing, because tornadoes usually don't happen before noon. Usually they will. Yeah. In some cases, this storm, it didn't matter what time of the day it was going to start when it wanted to. So I mean, that was probably another reason that these storms were also quick movers, which is slightly surprising, but not overly. So a lot of these fall events, I've noticed, tornadoes tend to move very fast, because the jet stream tends to be just very quick. These storms are racing 50 to 60 miles per hour.
Right. Yeah. Less drag and everything else. But yeah, exactly. I mean, who would have thought, let alone that time of the day, let alone that time of the year on the calendar? Well, we did know the ingredients were there no matter what time of the year it was, and we knew that the setup was there. But yeah, I still look back on it and I'm amazed by it. And as I mentioned before, the problem then for the cleanup, it dropped 40 degrees. It was 30 degrees the next day, and then a few days later it was 10, and it was snowing, and that November began our snowiest winter on record. Those folks in Washington had to pick up and clean up during the snowiest winter we've had from November to the next spring during cleanup, and that's one of the big problems with a late season tornado like that is the cold air, and that was brutal for those folks cleaning up, because they were having to plow snow and plow debris at the same time.
Now, when people see this YouTube video, it's only about 40 seconds. It shows you running off to go take shelter, and then you go back to programming. And there's a reason behind that. So if you want to discuss why it went back to programming.
Well, our stations here in Peoria, our hub of our stations are in Fort Wayne. We do local news from this building, but all of our other programming, including commercials, are run out of our hub in Fort Wayne, 575 miles away. So when we're here on the air and we say we need to take cover, we yell for everybody, including the control room, to take cover. Our hub in Fort Wayne saw what was going on because they monitor our station, and that's when they went back to programming, because they have control of the station. So they went back to programming because everybody darted out of here. We had to go to our shelter. Then when we got back a few minutes later, called up Fort Wayne, yeah, we'll take control of the station back. But they saw what was happening, so they instinctively just went to programming because we don't have control over that here. So we have a plunger, we hit the plunger, and that tells them, but they were monitoring the situation. They knew what was going on, so they put something on the air. I don't even know what we put on the air, we stayed in black for a while. They put something on the air. By that time, we were back. So little unique situation. Everybody just didn't. We flew to our shelters, went to our shelters, and the station really didn't stay black. We did have something on the air because the hub in Fort Wayne put something there. But no matter what was going on, I said we need to take cover. We need to get everybody. I don't care what's going on. I don't care if our mics are open. I don't care if we're still on the air and we're in the bathroom, because our storm shelters are our bathrooms. We're in the bathroom, huddled around the toilet, you know. And I don't care if our mics were on or not. We didn't care. We heard the tornado and it was touching down here or just nearby, and that's when we took cover. So, but it was yeah, it was a experience that I'll never forget. And that tornado came close to a couple of our you know, we have a big several 100-foot tower here, and it almost clipped one of our guy wires. And those guy wires are heavy gauge steel roped cable. And if one of those would have snapped, I don't know what would have happened to our tower or to anybody around, because that's like a big spring. So we just got in on the beginning of it on the northwest quadrant of our property, and had mud all over our building, mud all over our cars, because a lot of people don't realize tornadoes dig up the ground. And my car was covered in about 1 inch of mud, and our whole station, in front of our station, was covered in mud as well. But yeah, that was certainly a harrowing day, and it's what we trained for. But at the same time, we just wanted to make sure people were safe upstream, and we got on the air as soon as we could after we found out that the tornado had passed us and we were in the clear. Sun came right out after the tornado, and it was windy and temperature started dropping, so we knew we were in the clear to go back on the air and continue broadcasting.
Would you consider that the most memorable event of your entire career so far?
Pretty much so, yeah. I think so. Just from the sheer devastation, I've done several severe weather outbreaks and tornadic outbreaks, but that hit close to home personally, and it just hit close to home here in Central Illinois, because you know, we know, and I think we've educated the public more and more, that tornadoes can happen any time of the year, any day, any time of the day, night or day. We preach weather radios here. We have a weather radio campaign every year. We tell people that weather radio is your best defense, especially at night or in off hours when, you know, there might not be a newscast going on, especially on the weekends when, you know, there are budget cutbacks in radio and TV, and, you know, their radio and TV stations aren't staffed with live announcers, so to speak, usually during the weekends. So, but we were prepared for this and had everything in place. And I do want to say something to the folks out there watching, is a lot of people in Washington said, Chuck, I didn't hear the siren go off. I didn't hear it. We don't want people depending on the sirens. They're outdoor weather sirens. They're meant to be heard outdoors, not indoors. Don't depend on weather sirens, because of, you know, power can be out. In Washington's case, the roar of the tornado was so loud you couldn't hear the sirens because it was so loud. And people are saying, Chuck, I was waiting for the sirens to take cover. Don't wait for the sirens. Have a weather radio, have a texting service, an email service, of course, a TV, radio, but something more immediate. Don't depend on sirens. And a lot of people told me that day they waited for the sirens, and said, don't wait on the sirens, because they're, you know, they can be, you know, have problems, and we've seen that. They're just an outdoor situation. So anyway, that day was probably the most memorable weather day I've ever had in my career, and I'll never forget that. And and we just keep reviewing our procedures to make sure we keep people safe, and that's the number one thing. When it's breaking into programming, breaking into people's favorite shows, every station in the country, when they do severe weather coverage, gets complaints from people, or you're breaking into my shows. But at our station, safety is number one. We'll take the guff from the public, or even you know, people watching TV and they miss their favorite program or bits and pieces of it. We go with safety first, and that's our goal. And I think most people's mottos are that. But every station in the country who does severe weather coverage always gets that from viewers, and that's only natural. They don't like to have programming interrupted when it may not be affecting their area, but we take it seriously. So, and we did that day. We had continuous coverage all day long into the evening hours and 10 o'clock news. So that was quite a day.
When you were just discussing about all these people being angry, are they angry for any time you get on the air for a tornado, even for for example, like yesterday?
Yeah.
Were they angry that they missed their programs, even though you've had some memorable events not that long ago, including the event we just discussed? Are people in that area in Central Illinois at least more apparent to that there is going to be severe weather and expect your programming to be interrupted? They're not like, why are you interrupting my programming?
Yeah, we try to, but viewers are viewers, and everybody has habits, and so do viewers, and they have their favorite shows. But every station in the country who does severe weather coverage has the same thing. And people say, well, I live in Bloomington, but you have a tornado warning for Peoria, so why do you have to interrupt my programming? Well, I wish we could interrupt selected programming in selected cities, but we can't do that. There's technology is not there. It's just common. I don't blame viewers who get angry, because sometimes we've had to interrupt it inopportune times. I remember one time back in 2003, Mother's Day Eve tornado that hit South Pekin. It was an evening, late night tornado. I interrupted to do a cut in. I interrupted the final minute of Wheel of Fortune, and you would have thought I killed somebody's puppy, according to some of the viewers, because that's when they have the bonus round or whatever. And that's I interrupted the showcase showdown on The Price is Right one time for a tornado warning. And once again, you thought I had killed somebody's puppy, because the showcase showdown is who wins The Price is Right that day. And people didn't get to see that. But people and viewers are they're creatures of habit, and we understand that. But we tell them we have to take the high road every time. It's safety first. The FCC mandates that. The FCC mandates that we provide as much information for our visually and hearing impaired viewers as possible. So as much audio as possible and as much visual content as possible, because the FCC wants that. So once we tell people that, they tend to understand, but sometimes they don't. But that's the price we pay for what we do. But we'll always take the high road and keep people safe, and especially those who may not be able to understand visually or are hearing impaired. We have to cater to those viewers as well, because a lot of people listen to the TV who are visually impaired, and a lot of people watch the TV who are hearing impaired, and we have to appease and have programming and information geared toward those folks. So we always take the high road and said safety is first, no matter what. We don't care. We lose money. I'll interrupt commercial breaks for tornado warnings. Those commercials sometimes can be made up, maybe not made up, but that's the price we do in this business and what we're doing. So we take the high road and safety first. Now,
into the future, we could discuss this for another 20 minutes, but it's already past 8 o'clock. But
yeah,
when we talk about the future, now, as some people would know, especially in the Midwest, your station is about to be sold, we think. It seems like it's been taking forever to a group, which is Quincy Newspapers, or QNI as it's more or less known as, which might be your saving grace for the fact that you may or may not be hubbed out of Fort Wayne, even though their stations are also getting bought by Quincy. So when you look into the future, let's say, just for example, because you're going to be there, you're there you're going to be there until probably they pretty much take you to the senior home, I guess,
or toes up.
Yeah. So
toes up on a gurney. Yeah.
When you look at what the future is going to look like at your station, if you compare it to, let's say, the other Quincy stations, for example, like WREX or WGEM or even KWWF here, when you see what the Quincy stations do and what they could do at your station, are you excited for the future that could be coming, say, next spring when severe weather comes back, or in 2 months?
Yeah.
In November.
Oh, absolutely. We're excited because Quincy is a broadcasting family, and we've been owned by bankers for the past 8 years or so, since the station before I got here came over 6 years ago. But the station had financial difficulty and was in bankruptcy, and ended up being taken over by a hedge fund or a bank. And yeah, we want to be owned by broadcasters. Certainly, that would be in the right direction. And they're big on new sets, on HD, on top of the line weather equipment. At least that's what I've heard, and that's what I'm hoping. So yeah, I'm looking for good things out of it, simply because we're still the star station of the market as far as being the news leader, weather leader, sports leader, and we want to continue that. And any tools that we can add to that, yeah, that's going to be great. So we're looking forward to it. And it's been a long process. You know, when you get to when you deal with stations you own versus stations you're running, and you're looking for the FCC to approve that, it's a long, complicated process, more than it was when you just had single ownership of stations. So it's been a while, but yeah, we're excited. I'm excited about it, and we're looking forward to it immensely. And hopefully it'll happen. I think it'll happen from what we're told last quarter. So we should know something here in the next couple of months.
Now, I'd ask this because this is more inside type stuff. Do you right now at the station? Well, you have like 4 stations there. Some you own, or not you, but the bank, and some
Right.
are not owned. You run, but we won't get into that because that would be another hour. But do you have webcams now? Or
We have on a few computers. I'm using my own, but we have a Skype, a webcam system. Or are you talking outside cams?
Sky cam, because I was thinking webcam, sky cams. Like,
Okay, sky cams. Yeah. Oh yeah, we have 10 of our own area wide, and then we have the Illinois Department of Transportation cams. Gosh, probably over 100 of those we tap into at any one time. But we have 10 of our own that are stationed all around town, that we control, and time lapse and things like that. The IDOT cameras are just live cameras. We don't have any control over them. They point them where they want to, and there's no time lapsing. But we have 10 of our own cameras all around our viewing area.
Now, I'd ask this: do you use those during severe weather?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Especially, yeah, cameras. Skywatch camera network that we have, you know, if it's raining, obviously it's going to obscure the view. Yeah. But things coming in we can see. I've time lapsed great video of shelf clouds and wall clouds coming in. But once and then once the weather hits the camera, you can see it too. But the cameras are locked down. They're stationary. We can't. They're first generation, so we can't really maneuver them around. So if a storm is coming right for that camera and the camera view, yes, but we can't turn the cameras around because they're stationary from where they are. So, but we use them all the time because they're a great tool to see the weather coming right at you. Or on a beautiful day when you got a beautiful sun up or a beautiful sun down and a big full moon, they're not only good for severe weather, they're great for weather shots. And I love the cameras because they bring it right to you. And I run 3 or 4 cameras weathercast because I want to see what's going on around the area, whether anything's happening or not. So yeah, we like them. But yeah, we'll use them for severe weather whenever we get some great shots. But yeah, we certainly do, no doubt about it.
Yeah, you're going to need movable cameras because I think that might be the next thing down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could send you to a website for that, but I don't think Quincy would want to pay that much. But if they want to invest, that would probably be the first thing, is invest in that and all that stuff, because you pretty much are going to have new everything pretty much. So
we hope so. We're really excited and looking forward to the situation. As you mentioned, we have 4 stations. We have an NBC affiliate, WEK, which is the main station. Then we have the ABC affiliate, WHOI, which is owned by Sinclair. We have a My format station, My 59, which has a separate owner. We have a CW, which is owned by Sinclair. And then we also have Antenna TV, which is owned by another company. So we have one ownership here, but we're managing the other stations. And as far as the future of that, I mean, that's the future of the business. Anybody knows anything about it? I mean, there are some operations running multiple stations like that. Our hub in Fort Wayne serves several of our stations, and that's where the programming for several stations come out of. Whether or not the hub will continue, I don't know. I'm not privy to that. All I know is that I'm excited about broadcasters, true broadcasters in basically the area in Quincy, taking over and running the station as true broadcasters. So we're excited about that. I'm excited about that, and looking forward to good things.
Now, when you talk about that, since they're pretty much in the market to your southwest,
yes,
is there going to be a lot of, could there be a lot of sister type stations type coordination where you'd have bouncing between things? If for example, and this could be the case for all the Quincy stations, if there's like going to be like a big outbreak, and it's not like small markets have like tons of weather people running around, and this may be a case of, would you I don't know if you did this in November, because I think it was just you and that lady, the one. Yeah. Do you have, and I've noticed this in bigger markets, do you have like news people, like you're trained on radar and trained on the reports, and if there's like storm reports coming in from like social media or whatever, is somebody else doing that? So then you're concentrated on looking at a radar, looking at storm reports coming in from the Weather Service, and somebody else is doing something else, and then they could like get their mic up and say what they have to say.
Right. Yeah. And if we're looking for a significant outbreak like we did in November of 2013, we had all that in place. We had somebody on the social media platform. We had somebody just in charge of pictures who would send them in the system. We had all that coordinated. So any help I can get, I'll take, no matter if it's from Quincy, Champaign, Jacksonville, Cedar Rapids. I don't care. Somebody wants to help, but yeah, we have a plan in place, just like every station. And we had the plan in place. And when we get, garden variety severe weather, we still have the plan in place. And we also call up, we have a closed captioning company we call up, because we want to make sure closed captioning is going for our hearing impaired audience, especially. And the FCC is very strict about that. So we have that. If not, we're copying, pasting in our prompter and making sure it shows up on closed captioning. So we have all that covered, but I'll take help from anywhere, from any time during severe weather, because it's always a team effort when it comes to, especially when you get a significant severe weather outbreak like we had November 2013.
Now, when we discuss the future with the station, talk about like the future of radar. We already have dual pole. There's talk about making that better, maybe having more radars. There's been talk about the Weather Service possibly consolidating, which sounds scary in some cases. I would assume, and you've talked numerous times, that you have a good working relationship with the Weather Service office in Lincoln, and you do get, I think, a few of your counties, I think, are from the Quad Cities also. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But we have a couple of our northwest counties in the Quad Cities, northeast counties from Chicago as well. We deal with Chicago, Quad Cities, but most of our counties are covered under Lincoln, and then Lincoln covers several counties not even in our viewing area down toward southeastern Illinois. But have a good working relationship. Ernie Goetz, the officer in charge, great guy, and the warning coordination meteorologist Chris Miller is a great guy. I've known Chris since he was an intern at the Weather Service in Peoria when we had a Peoria office. And of course, all the other forecasters down there, I would name them all if we had time, but they're all, we have great cooperation and we work together, and we just try to get out the warning as fast as we can on all platforms as possible. Not just TV, not just weather radio, but you have to have text, email. You have to do all the social platforms. Get the most in your arsenal, and you'll have a good chance of coming out, ahead in a storm. But I have a great relationship with them. Great people at the Weather Service in Lincoln, and I value my life with their skills down there and their radar skills. And you did talk about radar. I think the big thing on the board right now is trying to cut the radar scan even more, because we still it takes a few minutes for that radar, that Doppler, to scan, and I think the next generation, they're shooting for half the time of the scan. They want to cut that scan in half and get to close as real time as possible, because it still takes a few minutes for that radar that Weather Service radar to scan, and that's I think that's what they're working on next, as far as trying to speed up that scan and have almost a real time type radar as much as possible.
Now, when we talk about your future, how long do you think you are going to stay in the business?
Well, I have a son in college, so I'll be paying college tuition for a few years, so it'll be at least a few years. But I'm going to, unless something would happen that I don't foresee, I plan on ending my career here. So I'm going to be here at least another few years, at least. And I'm in my late 50s right now. I'll still be here in my late 60s, if Lord and weather willing.
So, when you think about what it'll look like in 10 years, what do you think it's going to look like at that TV station?
Yeah, that's a good question. I firmly believe, with the FCC allowing you to operate a lot of stations in these licensing agreements, I mean, all of us, all the stations in Peoria, Cedar Rapids, Rockford, Manderview, all the stations in a market may be under the same roof one of these days, because stations are being traded like trading cards, as far as duopolies and whatever, how many stations you're running. They're almost traded around like trading cards sometimes. So if that continues, I think you're going to see stations with 5, 6, 7, 8 stations under one roof being run by one staff. And when we do severe weather coverage, we cut across the platform. We do it on all of our stations. We just don't do one. We do it all. And if we have to, we'll simulcast newscast as well. But I think you'll see more consolidation from the aspect of trying to run as many stations under one roof as possible. And that's just the nature of the beast. Right or wrong, good or bad, agree or disagree, that's the way the business is going. We don't have separate owners of 3 different TV stations in Peoria anymore, or Cedar Rapids, or wherever. So I think that's what we're going to be seeing, a lot more stations under one roof as the years go on.
I'll mention this. Cedar Rapids has 4 owners.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And of course, social platform, I mean, our Facebook pages, our Twitter, our website itself, we treat them as TV stations because we put content on there, and we treat those. And I know a couple of people who think that one of these days we might not even have a transmitter and towers anymore. We'll be broadcasting right over the broadband platform right into people's homes, and we won't have transmitters and towers anymore in the years ahead. That's a possibility as well. So, but I'm still excited about the future of everything. I've come from doing weather in front of a magnetic board and having no radar to what we have today, and I look back and I say, how did I even do it? How did I even do it? I had one model a day I could see at the Weather Service in Peoria came off a huge Diafax machine, if it would come in. One model run a day, or 2 if we were lucky. Started out doing that. Now I have 24 global models I look at a day. So from that aspect, it's been great, and I think the technology will continue to be ramped up as well, and speed and everything else, and warning time, et cetera, et cetera. But that's been a real exciting thing over the past 38 years that I've been doing all this, is the technology.
Now, there's 2 more things. The first off is with young people that want to get into the business and want to be on television and want to be a meteorologist. When you've talked about consolidation, there's going to be a lot less jobs in television. Do you see that that's possibly what's going to happen, and that these meteorology majors in college today, or even coming up if they're still in high school, would have to look at places like the Weather Service, which would mean more education, or private weather services, or say aviation weather, like working for Delta Airlines or whatnot?
Right. Yeah. And I always tell them, yeah, it's tough. There's more job applicants than jobs out there. But in broadcasting, in all my career, it's been like that. There have always been more jobs, and it has to do with being at the right place at the right time, and with all of us. And I just tell people, if that's your dream, go after your dream. there'll be some place to work. But here at our station, I mean, we have a 2.5-hour morning show, hour-and-a-half noon show. We have shows at 5, 5:30, 6, 10, all weekend shows. So we have openings from time to time, and like I said, it's tough even back in the good old days because there was always more applicants than jobs. And there's a glut of meteorologists out there. There's no doubt about it. But it's the right place, right time. Keep pursuing your dream, and people have done that. And I've had interns who have done that, and they've gone on to do good things. So it's there may be a few less jobs out there now, but it's always been a very competitive field because there are there's only a certain number of jobs for applicants. But I just tell people just to whatever you want to do, operational meteorology. I have a lot of kids come in here and say, I want to be a storm chaser. I want to be a storm chaser. Well, that's fine, but it's not realistic. There's not very many paid storm chasing jobs out there. You have to think of something else.
Well, in Oklahoma there is.
Well, yeah, but some people finance their way through sponsorships and things like that. But, chances are you're not going to get hired as a storm spotter and make a great living at it right out of college. You might do it on an internship or a volunteer basis. I know there are quite a few out there, but so I've had some of those kids say, well, maybe I'll look at broadcast or maybe I'll look at something else, and they've done something else. So, but I have a lot of them want to be storm chasers, and that's that seems like the glamorous side of the business. But sunny and 80 degrees is also part of the business as well, not just storm chasing.
Now, the second and the last thing I'm going to discuss is the name.
Mm-hmm.
That this and I'll do this for everybody. This is Chuck Collins, but that's not his real name. That's his TV name. And there's a story behind why the name changed. So discuss that.
Yeah, my real name is Early, like early in the morning, Earley, but it's pronounced Early. 10 years of my radio career went by my real name, Charlie. I grew up as Charlie. I didn't like Chuck growing up. I went to apply for a radio station job. The program director said, yeah, I want you. You got to change your name. I don't like your name. I want something shorter to the point, and I'd like you to change your name. This was 1984. I said, well, I'll change my name if you give me the job. He said, well, you can have the job. We just need to change your name. He says, I've always liked the name Chuck. It's short to the point. And it was a rock station at the time, or a top 40 station. And there was a Phil Collins song on the air at the time in the office. He said, how about Chuck Collins? You change your name to Chuck Collins, you got the job. Well, I needed the job, so I changed my name. And I've been known around here as Chuck Collins since, 1984. But I did use the almost first 10 years of my career in radio as my real name. But everybody knows me as Chuck Collins. And a few people know me as my real name. Those are friends I grew up with or know the story. So some people call me Charlie, but most everybody calls me Chuck. And so that's how that story unfolded. I needed the job, so I changed my name.
Based on Phil Collins.
Oh. That's right, Phil Collins, my cousin, Phil Collins. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine what would have happened if something else had been playing. It would have been funnier. Let's say a Prince song had been playing. That wouldn't have.
Yeah, no, nope. Couldn't imagine that. So it turned out well.
You're lucky that song was the Phil Collins was playing and not something else, or it would have been worse.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a name change. So people kind of know me as both, but most people know me as Chuck Collins, and that's how I've been known since 1984.
So we typically do our shout outs. This is if you want to shout out a person. Phil Collins, your cousin, supposedly. Not really his cousin, but or like people you've worked with over all these people that have interned or either there or you've worked with at Channel 31 or anybody you could, or any person at the Weather Service. It doesn't matter if you want to shout anybody out.
Okay, yeah, well, I shouted out to the Weather Service because the Weather Service in Lincoln, great folks, and Chicago and Quad Cities too. I deal with those folks not on a regular basis like I do Lincoln, but I just want to give a shout out to all the hardworking meteorologists who work different shifts, swing shifts. The Weather Service works very strange swing shifts. for those of us who work 2 to 11. I'm a second shifter. I work nights. So for all the meteorologists out there, no matter if they're private, public, broadcast, all the strange hours you put up with, that's who I shout out to. And to keeping the public safe and having strange hours, being away from family, and not being the highest paid individuals in the world either. So I just give a shout out to my fellow meteorologists and weathercasters out there doing their job, trying to keep the public informed of weather, especially severe weather.
That's good. Yeah, because there's a lot of them that just, especially during severe weather events where they're working longer than their actual shift, and they could be working, in some cases, 24-hour shifts if need be, which is
been there, done that. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to do my shout out. This is I've done this several times with the NWA meeting that's coming up next month in Oklahoma City, and I'll be there.
I'll be there, so I'll catch up with you.
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing. You think this is good, this show? I'm doing Polygon every night down there.
Oh, excellent.
So if I have to, I'll set up in the hotel with in the hotel lobby if they don't yell at me for that, and I'll do it there or whatnot. So it's going to be okay. I thought earlier this year, I thought when they were having all this flooding, I thought, is the hotel still going to be there? Is it going to float away? Because it seems like Oklahoma, and that must be something, because we discussed this for maybe a minute or two, how Oklahoma and North Texas went from this horrible drought, exceptional drought, 1 month, and boom, no drought. Yeah. And you'd hope California can go the same way, but you don't want it to just say, oh, 20 inches of rain. Whoosh. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, that'd be mudslides. Yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah.
It needs to be a nice, light, gentle rain, like a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, like every day. And that eventually will get it up. But a 1/2 inch of rain in Los Angeles, people freak out. They start driving like it's the end of the world. A 1/2 inch of rain is like a 1/2 inch of ice in Peoria or up here.
Oh, yeah.
They'll crash, and
my sister lives near LA, and yes, I've seen the coverage, and it's live coverage, wall-to-wall coverage when it rains. But that's the difference of there and here, and a lot of people don't understand that. But I can understand that, because a 1/2 inch of rain running off in the desert is can be very nasty and dangerous. But I know what you mean. But I'll see you in Oklahoma City. How's that?
Yeah. So we'll end it here. But when we talk about guests coming up next week, I still don't have a guest. However, I do have a topic for next week if I don't find a guest, and I can yell at Chuck about this, about finding guests. Anyway, but I'll probably, if we don't have a guest next week, it'll probably be discussing all these old tornado shows, these videos Noah made, like Terrible Tuesday, Day of the Killer Train, blah, 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 and all that stuff. And I'll start going and making fun of them, because they're very outdated now, and maybe they need to fix them. I know Noah doesn't have money, but I mean, they need to fix these. They're so, you look at them, they're on YouTube. There's a bunch of them. I watched the one on the Lubbock tornado. It wasn't done by Noah. It was done by the Office of Emergency Management or something, and it was so awful. It was terrible. And it's like, okay, it's bad enough when Terrible Tuesday, which is about Wichita Falls, that the music is terrible and whatnot. The only sad thing is Al Mohler is in that, and he unfortunately just passed away about a year or two ago. So, and he was at Dallas-Fort Worth for a long time. I think at the regional office toward the end of his career before he passed away. So we'll discuss that. And then later on in the month, Aaron Mentowski, who's up at WKBW in Buffalo, is expected to be on, if I can get a hold of him again. So he's expected to be on. He'll talk about lake effects. We'll talk about lake effect snow and what. And after that, we'll have to wait and see. But as I mentioned before, this will be the first time I'm going to mention this. The Oklahoma series, our series down in Oklahoma, will begin it'll actually begin the Friday before, which will be the Friday before the meeting starts. That'll be like a preview show. And we'll do it every night. I think Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. Thursday night we won't, because we're actually, myself and Henry has been on the show before. He's at a high school football game right now. we're going to be driving it Thursday night, so we're not going to want to do it Thursday night. And then we'll have a wrap up on the following Friday. So that'll get us up to like several shows at that point. So thanks everybody for joining us. We typically do this on Friday night. We typically do it at 7 p.m. Central Time, but sometimes we have to do it and adjust to when our people are on, if it's like on the West Coast or if it's in like another part of the world or whatnot. So thanks everybody for joining us, and I thank Chuck or Charles or Charlie or whatever his name is. He could.
Yeah, I'll go by anything.
He's probably going to be called like Timothy when we're down in Oklahoma City. So thanks everybody, and have a good weekend. Stay warm if you are staying warm, or stay dry, or stay cool, or stay dry, whatever. And we'll see you next week.